Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I hope you didn't miss out on the intro video too much. We've had some fun technical difficulties this week, but you know what? That's fine because it's the NBA offseason, and like we've been warning for weeks, it is finally starting to tail off. So I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey.
Hey, what's going on, Dre? And yeah, that one guy who hated the Zelda 2 ping at the front of the intro video will be happy this week if he's still listening. But yeah, there is some continuation of last week's news that we were speculating on. Some of it's come true, some of it hasn't. So still a lot to talk about.
So yeah, again, what gets kind of boring. Let's talk a little bit about last week's show, because first off, there was a mulligan, and I almost did something you hate. So for those of us that watch the show, I don't know if you know this, like Brian likes the idea of kind of doing a live show that we take a slice of and release. Essentially, like if you consider this almost a news show with very little editing. Now, I love like edited podcast, edited video, but those take a lot of work. So that's why I don't do it. Like basically, Brian, I'm like, I'd love to edit this more. And Brian, basically the way you won that argument is you're like, go ahead. And I'm like, I don't want to. So last week,
I guess that's kind of how it happened.
Last week, we made a mistake on show where just enough people on my Twitter feed had made it a foregone conclusion that Melo was going to Houston. I saw like NBA 2K ratings, pictures of Melo and mock-up Houston Rockets jerseys, just enough people talking about it as if it had happened that I assumed it had, because where we were at that point was Melo got traded to the Hawks. The Hawks basically said they were going to buy him out. They have since. I forget the exact terms, and I don't know why. And everybody and their mother believes he is going to end up in Houston. So last week we were basically talking about how the sky is falling for the Houston Rockets because of this. Now, the lucky news, I'm actually just going to – I'll throw out our two topics, Brian, then we go over them. Our two topics are going to be the underwhelming Warriors, which also relates to last week's show, and the Houston Rockets. A lot to discuss there, which relates to last week's show in the sense that Melo has still not signed with the Rockets. And if that hasn't happened, there is still time, because the following has happened since. First off, they signed Clint Capela to, if I'm getting this right, a 5-year, $90 million deal. Does that sound correct? I'm going to try and get Spo track up in front of me just to see.
Yeah, it was pointed out less per year than Jabari Parker.
Okay, so yeah, according to this, 5 years, $90 million. That is fantastic. It answers a funny debate we've been having, which was Dave Barry wrote an article that we basically kind of half agreed with, half disagreed with, the fun economics take, where we were like on mini hands. And for the record, I've got an article coming up this week that's the exact same way, where Chris Paul got a max contract, essentially. Dave Barry said he's probably not going to be worth it. We came out and said maybe, but there are a lot of caveats. Essentially, we think it's fine to overpay for a star player, if you think they are the final piece to get you over the hump. Or another easy out for NBA teams, and this is kind of a sad thing, is if there is a trade-off between where you can make up the money. So an easy case where this often happens on NBA teams, think like Al Horford is. We probably think Al Horford is overpaid. Even after the amazing season he put up last year, I'd say it's probably like right on the money. But the advantage you have with Al Horford is that team has some very young players, in particular Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who are still on rookie contracts. So you're going, well, you're probably overpaying Al Horford $5 to $10 million a year on the new contract, maybe. Can you make that up? And you raise your hand and you're like, yeah, Jason Tatum is on a rookie deal. He's not even a top 2 pick. And you're like, done. So the same exact thing happened with the Houston Rockets. We could probably agree with Dave's point that if you took Chris Paul's contract in the aggregate and did a very boring set of analysis like wins to dollars, he was probably overpaid. But there are two easy outs. One is Chris Paul is kind of mandatory if you want to be a contender. You usually need multiple stars on a team to be a contender, especially when the competition is good like the Warriors. So with Chris Paul, maybe overpaid. Without Chris Paul, they have no shot at a title. It's the same. We talked a ton last week about this. Toronto Raptors, we are like, oh my goodness, we are so on board with Kawhi there even for one season, because one season of Kawhi ups your odds of a title so much. Same with Chris Paul. But additionally, they made up the money here, because if you look at, I'm going to go to Basketball Insiders real quick just to get it up in front of me, Brian. I hope they have Capela.
Yeah, I've got it up on Spo track right now if you want me to read it out.
Why I don't, is there an easy way? So help me out. We can do like a tutorial for myself in the audience. Is there an easy way on Spotrac to see multi-year on a team?
Yes. So what you do is you go to the team page, and then there's a little tab. Let's go to it right now. So you can
So
see I'm here on Capela's. Actually, let me just share my screen with you, Dre. That's how we'll do it.
I go to NBA, and I'm repeating this like for our listeners on the audio show. Pull over and do this yourself. Don't do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Houston Rockets team page.
Okay, so I'm on Capela's team page still. Let's see. Where does it even say the team he plays for? Here we go, Rockets.
So you go to the Rockets, which I managed to just do teams Rockets.
Okay, let's just do that. Teams. Oh, they have really large font. We're gonna have to scroll down a bit. We're doing it live.
We're not aware of all the teams in the NBA. There are a lot, Brian. The Golden State Warriors and Houston Rockets right next to each other alphabetically.
So here we go. So here's the trick: is these tabs up here, which are kind of hard to see. This multi-year summary is what you want.
Summary, fantastic.
This is not really a usual design. This is kind of weird. So we might need Patrick to weigh in on that. But yeah, here you can see divided by position, right?
But what I ended up doing is I just went to Basketball Insiders because I like they do it a little nicer for me. They just have one table, all of it. And unfortunately, though, they still don't have Clint Capela up there. But if we break it down, here's how it works out. Over the next 5 years almost, Chris Paul is only 4 years, but James Harden is 5. So over the next 4 years guaranteed, they have Chris Paul, James Harden, Clint Capela, and essentially those three combined really are always around 100 million, which is completely fine. So that's the funny thing, is that basically if you look at the Houston Rockets and say you have a core of Chris Paul, James Harden, Clint Capela for the next 4 years, that is for the aggregate cost, if you put all three of those players together, that is a freaking steal, which is a funny way of looking at it, but it is somehow how you have to kind of look at the Tetris pieces of putting a team together. You go, I might be overpaying a little for this veteran here because that was the only way to get that veteran, but if I underpay elsewhere, I make up for it, and they did it. And I was a little sad because, there was this brief window, and I do just believe it's the off season and people get bored. And we've been joking you're running out of stories. So it's the off season. We're running out of stories. The only free agent that's really a big name that's still out there is Clint Capela. And I knew for the record that nothing was going to happen with him this year regardless, because there were like three outcomes. One is Houston offers him a contract, which they did, and he agrees to it. So that happened. The other outcome is another team offers him a contract. He agrees to that contract. Houston says, screw you, we like you, we're going to match that contract. And for the record, I kind of wish another team had pushed that button just for fun to say, screw you, Houston, we know you're going to pay up for Clint Capela. We're not going to let you get him for a discount, but nobody did that. The final option is Clint Capela says, I really don't want to play for Houston specifically. It has to be I don't want to play for Houston, because that means turning down all contracts. I will accept the qualifying offer for next year. This happened back in the day for David Lee, by the way, on the Knicks right before he went to the Warriors. He says, I'll accept the qualifying offer. Then I am a unrestricted free agent in the offseason, and I'll go wherever. So when that third option was still on the table, I was like, you know what would be crazy? Next year, Paul Millsap's number comes off the books for the Denver Nuggets. So if next year they grab Clint Capela and put him next to Nikola Jokic, that could be something. And then, of course, that lasted all of 10 seconds before Houston basically got a deal. So Houston has a fantastic squad, and we're sitting here going, we bashed Melo to hell. And so as long as they don't pick up Melo, this team is in such good shape. And one rumor I'm hearing, so if it goes the other way, this is even more nuts, Brian. One rumor I'm hearing is they're attempting to pick up Nicholas Batum and trying to offload Ryan Anderson in the case. And if they can, that would be huge. So Houston is very much, will remind you of some other franchises that we've thought of in the same boat, as the Oklahoma City Thunder back in the day with James Harden, as the Los Angeles Clippers back in the day with Chris Paul, where they have an amazing core, and all they have to do is get reasonable players around that core, and they're a contender. They even did that last year, right? They were the odds-on favorite. If Chris Paul doesn't go down injured, and they don't have not just a bad shooting performance, one of the worst ever. I still don't believe the 538 take of the it just
600,000 to 1 or something like that. I can't remember what it was.
Weird because also what I've said from a Bayesian perspective is, in Bayesian the key is you have correct priors, which means you have a good estimate of how likely something is to have happened. And one of my favorite actually former favorite authors, he kind of went very Trumpish and very weirdish, and I don't know, but Nassim Taleb, has talked before about just how bad humans are at actually estimating priors. So that's my take there. That when you were reading these articles about the likelihood of a game that bad, I kind of go, I don't know if you estimated it correctly. But it took a very unlucky game and an injury to a key player for the Houston Rockets to not make the finals this year, and they would have been the odds-on favorite in the finals, I would argue, even without Chris Paul. So they're in a great spot, and we're just going, don't mess this up, and we do think that Melo would be messing it up. So that's kind of our Houston thing. Amazing work on Clint Capela. Last night you were saying like he got less per year than Jabari Parker or whatever.
Yeah.
We keep noting this, that players' contracts are not a realistic representation of their value. It's a stock ticker of their contract at the time they sign, which is very rough, because ironically, like Jabari Parker as an example, Jabari Parker getting signed before Clint Capela is part of the reason Clint Capela's value might have gone down or up. Sometimes the reason a player takes the contract they do is because there's nobody else on the free market willing to offer them the money. Whereas had they been able to sign earlier, they would have gotten that. But then, of course, the difference between, say, Clint Capela and Jabari Parker is Clint Capela, the Houston Rockets, and of course they didn't, why would they, did not renounce their rights to him, whereas the Milwaukee Bucks rightly renounced their rights to Jabari Parker. So it's kind of like when people are going, can you believe this player is getting paid more or less than this player? First off, we did just notice there are discrepancies in the NBA with how players are paid. Scorers are paid much better relatively to defensive players. But then there are just other weird conditions. So Clint Capela, we think this is a steal, and it's a nice bit of luck, because I know like DeAndre Jordan, he took a 1-year deal with the Mavericks, and his logic, I believe, was next year there's going to be more money available. So I'm not going to take a long-term deal here because my value's low. I'm going to count that my value stays high enough that I can sign a better deal in the offseason. Whereas Clint Capela, for better or for worse, basically just said, I'm just going to take the 4 years and be done with it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so interesting what happens. So first off, if that Batum rumor does go through and he's healthy, that would be crazy. Like they would probably be the favorites over the Warriors. But that's so many ifs. We'll wait for that conversation. And in fact, as far as the jumping the gun on the Carmelo Anthony, seems like it's still going to happen. He was, like you said, he was officially released by the Hawks today. And Wojnarowski and I believe others are still saying he's expected to sign with the Rockets. So depending on what happens there, it's going to be a big deal. But back to Capela's contract, yeah, it just seems like there weren't enough teams that had cap money available that anyone would want to make a run after him. So it is a little surprising that he didn't try signing a 1-year deal and waiting till next offseason when there'd be a lot more teams with cap money. That being said, there's a lot more players that are going to be free agents next year too.
He's in a funny situation with that, different than DeAndre Jordan. And again, when I said like a stock ticker, what's also important is the type of player. What is really frustrating in the NBA, honestly, and something we harp against a lot, is how favorable they are to basically veterans and how much crap they give younger players. And this is very common in North American sports, where because basically players on rookie deal contracts aren't able to be at the negotiating table, and in fact, like the NBA and the NCAA's amateur rules would probably make that illegal anyway, they don't get to negotiate. So the difference between DeAndre Jordan and Clint Capela is Clint Capela's options were, I take a 1-year deal for, let's see, I do not know off the top of my head. Let's see if basketball, I spelled qualifying with a W, Brian, the less conventional. Okay, so there's a qualifying, I do not know the Clint Capela qualifying offer, but I mean, I'm willing to bet it's something like $5 to $7 million. There was a qualifying offer Clint Capela could have signed for $5 to $7 million and then said, okay, in the offseason, I'll take a better deal. Now that's a little different than DeAndre Jordan, who says, I'll take a 1-year deal for $21 million and hope for a better deal in the future, where the algebra might add up exactly where the agent says to Clint Capela, hey, look, let's say you get the max next year, but you take a qualifying offer this year. Well, you're going to leave $15 million on the table, and you could also probably throw some numbers at them. He's in a tax-free state. They don't have state income tax in Texas. He's in a tax-free state. You get a big bunch of money. You could put that in the bank somewhere, get some interest, start doing something, right? The beauty of compound interest. And even taking this lesser deal, the long-term effect of that is more money to you. And that's always the hard part. Like, we had a fun one way back in the day. I forget which player, by the way. It might have been Blake Griffin. It was a college player. It might have been Andrew Wiggins. I'm trying to remember. But we basically said, should this guaranteed... Oh, it might have actually been Ben Simmons. I don't know. But it was, should the number 1 draft pick, like the consensus out of high school draft pick, would it be in their best interest to try and bypass the draft. And what you have to do is you basically have to sit out of basketball for 2 years, and then you can sign basically like a Jeremy Linish contract.
Can you play overseas during that time, though?
No, can't do anything because basically FIFA, the NCAA, or FIBA, not FIFA, not soccer. I guess you could play overseas soccer. Maybe, I don't know.
Another corrupt international organization.
But you can't play FIBA, you can't play international basketball, you can't play the NCAA. Those are all associated with the NBA. So essentially, you sit out basketball for 2 years. You sign the max deal you could get as a player, an undrafted player entering the NBA. And if you did that, then you get into this weird scenario where you kind of start asking yourself, well, if I was a top 3 pick and I could have gotten endorsements and I could have been investing that money, is it really worth it? And it's also a big risk to sit out 2 years. So the same point, Clint Capela, they're like, it might have been a difference of a couple $1 million saying, listen, if you take the qualifying offer and trust that your value goes up in the offseason, you're basically like making a $5 million bet you don't get injured. Just take the money. And I mean, the same thing happened with like Steph Curry back in the day. So, I mean, this was kind of a lose situation for Capela, but it is, we note this a lot. The rules are set up in teams' favor against young players. And the only real reason that NBA teams, in our opinion, are like poorly run is they don't take, like, they give themselves a cheat code and they don't take advantage of it. You know, Andrew Wiggins, the cheat code is you get Andrew Wiggins for nothing and you get 4 years to see if Andrew Wiggins is a player. And if he's not, what you need to do is in year 3, you trade him to the Knicks for something. And what they did is they didn't trade him in year 3 and they said, well, we got to sign him because of sunk costs. So with Clint Capela, it's just a classic example of the rules were favored in the Rockets structure. And I'm not in the least bit surprised that the Rockets were able to, you know, take advantage of this in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, if I were Capela, I absolutely would have signed this deal if that's all that was available. Like, I'm risk adverse. You know, again, the Steph Curry situation is a great example. He missed a lot of money on that. I would have definitely taken this. But I want to the contract itself has been getting some commentary on it, and I think you might have been involved with this on Twitter. If not, then I'll be putting you on the spot here. But here's what I mean. So the base salary starts about 14 next year, goes up to about 18.2 in 2022, the 23, the final year of it. However, the cap hit comes all the way up to almost 20 million because he's got 1.5 million in incentives each year, and it's people were saying that they designed more kind of advanced stats-ish incentives. For instance, they didn't do rebounds per game. They did rebounding percentage, I want to say. I think it was 30% rebounding percentage or something like that. So anyway, so I have 2 questions for you based on that. First is rebounding percentage a decent stat at all? And secondly, it's kind of like, is that advantageous to the team even still? Because they could just, I guess it's to him, because they could, if they bench him and limit his minutes, he can still get there on rebounding percentage, right, and not total. So it's kind of interesting to me.
They offered him $1.5 million in incentives between a combo of rebounding percentage and free throw percentage. And I will say this as the person who gave the talk at Great Lakes Analytics Sports Conference. I absolutely love the free throw percentage. I think that makes a lot of sense because it is an area that people leave on the ground. He's a career 48.2% career. I mean, he got it all the way up to 56% last year. But that's just, as I said in my talk at the Great Lakes Analytics Sports Conference, that's just leaving money on the table. The defensive rebound percentage one is interesting. He's hit that number twice. I don't have a problem with it. I'll stress the same thing we were saying about like Rudy Gobert. It is very indicative that one of the top defensive players in the NBA doesn't get a fully guaranteed max contract and gets incentives added, whereas we never see that for scoring players. So I don't really care one way or the other. In fact, what I almost feel this was like is I almost feel like when you're negotiating, I've heard lots of tricks is sometimes you just include things with the hopes that they'll pick them off or you agree, you meet in the middle. And so, that could have been like the final straw as they're like 92 million. And they're like, okay, how about 90 million and $1.5 million in incentives? And they'll deal. So this almost feels just like one of those things at the end that one way or the other, I really don't care. All I can say is that the Rockets really won this one. And one of the sad things to me, just you were saying, other people competing for the contract, just one of the points is we keep noting how people are fooled by very simple things like per minute versus total minutes played. This was the same problem back in the day for Kevin Love. because Clint Capela doesn't play over 30 minutes a game, his numbers look a little lower. And teams let that fool them, which to us is just bizarre. So
that's why I noticed in I think it's the ESPN article, they said, well, he averaged 13 points and 10 rebounds a game or something like that. And it doesn't seem that impressive. But when you look at the real numbers, he's, one of the top 10, maybe even top 5 type players. He's had a really good year.
Yeah, and I mean, it also gets funny on teams like the Rockets. This was true back in the day of the Boston Celtics, and is a good thing to keep in mind for the type of player you're signing. Which is how good the team is, because he played for a 60-plus win team, right? How many did Houston won last season? You should know better than me, Brian, because they finished above your 65.
65 wins.
And back in the day when the Boston Celtics, the first modern super team, I guess, right, formed, the first modern Big Three, their players all saw a decline in minutes per game, and the reason was very simple. They were blowing out opponents, and the right thing to do, and a strategy we hope more teams adopt, is you rest your stars, because it's more important to keep your stars healthy than it is to super blow out opponents. So, Clint Capela's on this team that's just is absolutely, led the league in point margin last season, led the league in wins. And so they're like, well, he only plays 27 minutes a game. It's like, well, guess what? If you're a 40-win team and you sign him, he'll probably play a couple more minutes just because you're a worse squad. So I think a point we've made a lot is, and this is why we still have a show, Brian, right? Or at least why we still feel like keep talking, is that people do not understand the right way to value players in the NBA. And a lot of the classic tricks, many that we hoped would have died with the advent of the advanced analytics movement, are still around. And I mean, I think it's not the worst. Like, I think this is better than he would have got. I remember I was talking about Ben Wallace last week's show about how amusing I found his contract when he left the Pistons to go to the Bulls was, about how, despite the fact that he's one of the greatest defensive players ever, that still was an amazing contract. I think defensive players are rightly starting to get more valued by the right squad. I just still think it's a ways off from where we would like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of anything more for the Rockets and Capela, but this last Carmelo Anthony domino is really important for them, for sure.
The only theory I've had on this, and the reason it pops up, is because of the Houston Rockets, and I can't remember where I heard this theory originally. It was back in the day, the Houston Rockets, I believe, I'm going to get Basketball Reference up in front of me again, Brian. I believe they had Chandler Parsons signed on a second. I completely misspelled Chandler Parsons, Brian. But I believe they had him on a second round deal, and those are really super favorable, because as mentioned, just like they're not quite as good as late first round. Late first round are by far the best contracts in the NBA, but they had him on a second round deal, and they basically relinquished him in his fourth year to free up cap space. And this was a baffling move. You're like, why don't you just take his fourth year on that second round deal? It's super cheap. And he went to Dallas. But the theory I've heard is that Dwight Howard and him shared an agent, and that because those two shared an agent, Dwight Howard's agent was like, I'm not going to even have Dwight Howard talk to you if you don't let Chandler Parsons out. And from the agent's perspective, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because from the agent's perspective, it's like, if Chandler Parsons gets $5 million a year next season, I only get 3% of that, right? That's nothing. Whereas if Chandler Parsons, I believe he got a big payday, 10 to 20 million, somewhere in there. If Chandler Parsons gets a big payday next year, that is much more to me. So obviously I want that. So, agents have a vested interest in getting the best contract for their players. So with that being said, that's the theory we've heard. Now, the theory I have about Melo is maybe Chris Paul was like, I am not going to re-sign with you if you don't pick up Melo. Yeah. So I think Melo might be a domino to an agent or a player on the Rockets. And by the way, I haven't had time to do this, but I believe Basketball Insider has agent stables. If you look over that, I might sneeze in a second, but excuse me. If I was an editor of the show, as I mentioned, I would actually edit that out, but I'm not going to. But you can actually, I was doing this earlier. I was like looking over which agents have which players under them, because I was going to try and see if I could find the one that had Melo. And what's amusing is there's an agent that has like Mike Conley, Andrew Wiggins, and Zach LaVine under him. And I was like, this guy is an MVP agent. Holy cow.
You're talking about Bill Duffy. Yeah, he's one of the oldest NBA agents. He's been around a long time. I'm not saying age, but in terms of tenure. I'm not sure what his age is.
I haven't had time to investigate that as much as I would want. Like if Melo shares an agent with any players on the Rockets, if Melo and Chris Paul, that's been a conspiracy theory for years. But that's pretty much what I have is like I could buy if Chris Paul coming back was, I'm not coming back if you don't sign Melo. And I'm saying, fine, we'll get Melo if he comes for this available. And then given the fact that they gave Capela incentive laden, I mean, they might do, if they're wise, they do the same now. It's like, you have to have these, we'll sign you to 1 year for this kind of a DeMarcus Cousins deal. So.
And I think that's a really likely answer. I just hope Morey at least argued with Chris Paul for a while before he finally relented because, man.
If that happened, we are completely.
Yeah. But I think that's the most likely answer.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the funny thing is there are player movements. DeMarcus Cousins is a classic example of a player that we would never do what these teams did. We wouldn't. Well, actually, we agreed with the New Orleans Pelicans. So for most teams, though, like the Kings, we were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? But there are players that are so bad, and Melo last season by all the numbers was this bad, where you'd go, no team should want this player. That I don't care what metric you're using. And so that's why we're in conspiracy theory territory. But in the same note, it still hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
We'll wait. That is now the last story of the offseason. So rest assured we'll be talking it. Let's talk about a story that you and Jeremy Britton inspired last week. And I actually have a rough draft up and it is going to be released this week. And I called it something like why the Rockets may underwhelm next year. And the reason this came up is we were talking last week about the Warriors. I keep saying Rockets versus Warriors, Brian. They're interchangeable in my brain. But why the Warriors might underwhelm. And you and I were talking about them last week, and I was basically going, I'm kind of baffled by the sheer, just maybe unwarranted optimism in their performance next season. Fun thing I got done. A friend of mine went out to Vegas, kind of like Patrick does every year, and just threw some bets down. And I was like, could you do me a favor? Could you throw $25 down on Toronto to win the NBA title finals and $25 down on OKC to win the titles? And I believe I got those for 22-1 for Toronto, which was criminal, and something like 30-40-1 for OKC. So if OKC versus Toronto is in the NBA finals, I'm guaranteed $500, which would be amazing. But I was kind of just going, yes, I believe the Warriors are the best team in the NBA if we believe that Curry and Durant are healthy, because that's what cost them last season. Basically, they were 1-1A with the Houston Rockets. Steph Curry ended up injured for 30 games of the NBA season, and that was enough to put the Rockets over the edge. So I basically said, if they're a fully healthy team, currently they are probably a little better than the Rockets, especially if the Rockets do something stupid like pick up Carmelo Anthony. But the other way I was thinking about it was if the Warriors have a couple of things bounce the wrong way for them, this could go really wrong. And that was to me the more pressing piece, which is I thought there are a lot of possible pitfalls for the Warriors. Now, I'm not saying these are going to happen, but I just think it's important when you are discussing how optimistic you are about a team to keep in mind that there are lots of things that can go wrong and might even be more likely to go wrong with what we know. And I don't feel people are giving us enough press. And the metaphor I ended up using in the article at the very end was the Chicago Bulls in 1998, because the Chicago Bulls in 1998 won 62 games, tied for the best record in the NBA, managed to win another title, albeit the two last series were very close, 7 games against Indiana on the Eastern Conference Finals. They didn't have home court, and then it required a game winner by Michael Jordan to keep it from going to Game 7. But there was a lot of stuff that had to go right for the Bulls. 3 very old players, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, had to stay healthy. A bunch of players, with their contracts ended, had to, stay cohesive. Players with off-the-court issues. Dennis Rodman obviously was notorious his whole career for that. Steve Kerr and Michael Jordan had come to blows years before in practice. So it's like a very volatile team had to avoid a lot of pitfalls to win an NBA title. And I'm just saying, if a couple things bounce the other way, I'm going to shout out the Cracked podcast because I was listening to it today, and they were talking about presidents. And I forget who the guest was, but they made a very astute observation, which is as soon as history happens, we kind of just view it as a foregone conclusion without going, oh, my goodness, that was so close to somebody else becoming president. And everybody in the present can accept this about Donald Trump, right? All of us, Nate Silver, if you followed Nate Silver for the past year, we keep seeing all of these. If people had voted this way in this state, or if this had gone this way, if the Comey email thing hadn't been released this time, or if this hasn't happened here, or whatever.
Total Black Swan event, right? Speaking of what's his name.
Well, that's the belief. The Nassim Taleb saying Black Swan, a very unexpected, very unlikely outcome that happens more frequently than people think. But the same is true of a lot of other presidential elections that I don't even know. They were going over a lot of them on the Crack podcast this week, where you just go, I think like Abraham Lincoln's a classic one where I think it was closer, and they were like, there's lots of fun political scientists will know, like fun split party cases or whatever happening, right? So the same is true in the NBA, where after a team has won a title, we kind of view it this foregone, obviously. Whereas, like I mentioned, I was going back through, and the Bulls' last three-peat, they were in a Game 7 against the Indiana Pacers. So it's kind of like there are lots of teams that were dominant or won that a couple things bounce the other way, or somebody's ankles don't hold up. I mean, that is my favorite point about the 2016 NBA Finals. We saw if enough things break, Steph Curry takes a step back because of injury, Andrew Bogut gets injured.
Kevin Love is healthy.
Draymond Green gets suspended. All those things happen, and it changes the tide of what is a very lopsided outcome. And I'm just saying that could happen. So that's over the article. And I think basically what I'll say is I'll let it stand for itself. We'll release it. And the major points I have is that some players are getting older, like Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston, and that they also have some very young players, so we don't know how they're going to do. That DeMarcus Cousins, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry have all had recent health issues. I'd kind of call it Goldilocks and the Three Bearish, right? Kevin Durant, he's missed like 10 games a season, but he hasn't quite seemed himself. Not Draymond Green. Steph Curry missed 30 games last season, didn't quite look himself. DeMarcus Cousins is out with an Achilles problem. Who knows how he's going to be back? 3 major injuries. We have no idea how they're going to play out. It is worth noting that thanks to LeBron James hopping squads and here's a funny one, Brian, that makes me feel icky. So Kawhi was traded for DeMar DeRozan and Jakob. I can't believe that is how you say it. It is Pirtle, like a cat. Like if you go to Basketball Reference, it looks like they're saying you should pretend you're a cat when you say Jakob Pirtle's name. Those two players are pretty good, at least regular season wise. And Kawhi did not play at all last season. He played 9 games. So it's funny because I saw some articles this week about the Boston Celtics offering it was funny when I was reading it. They're like, Boston Celtics offer most, if not all, of their good draft picks for Kawhi. Yeah. And I went, why wouldn't you just offer all of them? Why would most ever be an option? But the funny thing from our perspective is DeMar DeRozan, overpaid, yes, but above average NBA player, and Jakob Pirtle, underpaid and really good-looking young player, are already better, in our opinion, than trying to spin the lottery on a random draft. That's just a funny point where we keep talking about people overvaluing the wrong things. It is so amusing to me when I see a major package is offered for player, and you're like, what is it offered? They're like 4 first-round picks. I'm like, that is no. I'm like, I'll take them. This is a funny perspective, Brian. Provided I have like a star or two, and it's to put me over the edge, I take DeMar DeRozan over 4 first-round picks, which it'd be over multiple years. No, I'm sorry, like just an above-average NBA player. Or how about let's put it in.
Are you saying if you're the Spurs specifically, or just in general?
I think neither would have been my answer to those two deals, right? I wouldn't have taken the draft picks. I wouldn't have taken DeMar. But I'm saying, let's say in a vacuum, those are my only 2 options. I think I take DeMar. I think I take DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Pirtle over the draft picks. If those are the only things I'm allowed to do. If the owner gives me an ultimatum and says you have to trade him, you have to take one of these 2 deals, I think I take the one that probably gives me another 10 to 15 wins next season.
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting because now the Spurs do have a legit chance still to make the playoffs. I'm a little bit sketchy on that. I'm worried, I don't know if Rudy Gay and LaMarcus Aldridge are mirage or not. That could fall apart. Those players are older as well, not to mention Pau Gasol, who's somehow still pretty productive for his age. So, yeah, I mean, that would be tempting because otherwise you're looking at a sure, tanking kind of scenario, and we know that's bad. So that's a really interesting thought.
But basically, the Spurs, the Nuggets, the Mavericks, the Lakers, I can't remember if there are any other teams, got better next season. And then, of course, the Houston Rockets, thanks to keeping Capela and Chris Paul, and the Utah Jazz, just by virtue of getting older and having Rudy Gobert, and the Portland Trailblazers basically stayed in place. The competition out west has gotten harder. The reason I brought up those first 4 teams, Nuggets, Mavericks, Lakers, and how did I just drop the 4th one already? Mavericks, Lakers, Nuggets, and whatever. I'll remember it.
Utah Jazz.
Oh, actually, Thunder. I didn't say the Thunder.
Oh,
But the
Thunder. Yeah. We love the Thunder next year.
Up Nerlens Noel. Those teams were 5-15 against the Warriors last season. If they pick up a couple wins, I'm not saying they're going to be better than the Warriors, but I'm saying if instead of going from being a lopsided, right, that's a 75% win rate for the Warriors. If they go from 75 to 60, and then additionally, if in the playoffs, a couple of those teams give the Warriors a harder workout. That's another part about the Warriors' recent success in the last 2 years. They have had a relatively easy path to their hardest competition. 2 years ago, they went 12-0 before facing the Cavaliers in the finals. Last year, they had 10 games before playing the Houston Rockets. If this season, if it goes up to like 6 games, 7 games, they might be more beat up in the finals. And this year, the finals look, between Boston, Philadelphia, and Toronto, there is a very real chance that the East puts up a better squad. So basically, I think competition has also gotten harder for the Warriors. So there are a lot of speed bumps that could make it a little harder for the Warriors. And as I was saying about like presidents, we have this belief that things were much more likely than they were. And if we just decrease that range of outcomes for the Warriors so it's a little more easy for them to tilt into the losing, I think that could happen. I do end the article with a point where I basically say, by the way, we love Kevon Looney. We love Jordan Bell. These two players look great. They have 2 MVP players, Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. Those 4 players is such an amazing core that if those players get the right amount of minutes, that could just be an amazing squad, and this team could just steamroll, and this could look like a silly article. And the whole inspiration for this post, Brian, was you and Jeremy Britton, where I've said, you two are my favorites because you basically make bold statements about the Warriors, and it's almost is it Cassandra in Greek mythology? I'm trying to remember. It's like Cassandra.
I can't remember what Cassandra did.
I'll look this up. But basically, it's one of those where, like, as soon as you say it, it's going to go the wrong way. So Jeremy Britton, as I mentioned in the article, he came up with a post where he said the Warriors could win 50 wins. This was right after they acquired David Lee. For those that forget, by the way, David Lee had his arm bitten by Wilson Chandler. They thought they might have to amputate, and he was never the same player. So
wasn't there a piece of a tooth stuck in his arm or something like that? Something crazy story?
It's a giant. His arm just swells up huge. But, that happened. But he released an article that said, like, the Warriors could win 50 games. They won, like, 37 and 23 the next 2 years. Then after they signed Bob Myers, he's just like, this GM is just spouting the same trite nonsense. I don't think this team is going anywhere. It took them 2 seasons before they were winning 50 wins. So it's just a funny case. And then last season, you were basically saying you thought the Warriors championship window with their current core might be closed, and they went on to win a title. I'm just joining that squad. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm gonna basically say I'm skeptical of the Warriors, or at least I think there are enough things wrong with this team that I'm not as hyped about them as other people. And this is what makes that hard, as I'm even admitting, I'm like, if you gave me even money, if I was only allowed even money on every team in the NBA to win a title, because that's the difference between taking Toronto and OKC, right? I was offered very good odds. If I had to take even money on every team to win a title, of course Golden State's the box I'm checking. But I'm also just caveating that with, I think there are a lot of things that could go wrong. So if you can short Golden State at the right price, I think that's a good thing too.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be precise here with what we're saying, and that's why we come to these conclusions, right? So, what I said last season, right before the playoffs, was that, I did think that if you had to pick a single number of titles that this Warriors team would win in the future, it would be 0, because they were not the favorites coming into the playoffs. Curry was hurt. We had no idea if he would be back healthy. He was. Rockets had home court advantage and seemed to be healthy. Chris Paul was not hurt yet. So, at that time, I think it was the right call. The Rockets were the favorites, not the Warriors. And then when you look into the future, they have all these exploitative contracts. They're not going to be able to keep all these players together. Well, they'll be able to keep that rolling, and keep these underpaid players on the roster in the future. So, that didn't come true. They won the title, and that's great. But I think it's still the right thing to say coming into this offseason. And what do I mean by that? Are they the favorite team to win the title next year as of right now? Probably. They may end up being, tied with the Rockets or Toronto Raptors heading in, once by the time the offseason is over. But even if they are the favorite team to win, it's not like they have a 50% chance or even 60 or 70% chance to win like people think. It's like it's a foregone conclusion. No, I mean, I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, but I'm guessing it'd be more like 20 or 30% for the most likely team to win of anyone in the league. So
funny too, because I mean, Patrick and I have done this before, where it's very boring, and we were just talking about bad Bayesian priors.
Exactly.
You just do like an 80-20 times 4, right? 80% chance.
Yep.
You have an 80%. That's usually the most lopsided playoff series in the NBA. 80-20, and so you have 80-20, 80-20, 80-20. Right, that drops to like 40%.
Yes,
series, and so we're saying, let's see, this is very boring, but 90-10. Actually, this is a fun one, Brian. So let's see if I can just get I realize I don't have like a calculator on here, so I'm just going to do this in like Google Calculator real quick. Hopefully, it lets me do this. So, country times 0.9. Times 0.9 times 0.9. So even if hypothetically they were a 90% favorite the whole way through,
which is impossible, right? No one could be that high.
Well, that's not impossible. It could happen, but that's a 66% chance. So it's like, I think their odds on Vegas are worse than that, right? I think the money you have to put down to like bet on the Warriors to win is worse than that. So it's like, I just don't buy it. So that's just where we're at. We're basically saying it's a very hard place to be, where you're going, people are 70% hyped on them, and we don't know the right number, but we do think it is significantly below 70.
Right. That's right. And so I want to talk a little bit about, why I think we're in this place anyway. Number one, so it came right after Cousins, right? As a knee-jerk reaction to Cousins. Like we always say, we don't think his production is quite what everyone else does, right? Too many turnovers. He's improved his shooting, but, he's just not as efficient as he should be, despite all these positive numbers he produces, right? And on top of that, so not only are people overrating his production, they're probably underrating the Achilles injury, which is, there's really bad historical outcomes for players with Achilles injuries going forward. Interesting, the Warriors signed one of them, Jerebko, and he apparently is going to talk to Cousins about rehabbing an Achilles, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't been great for players coming back from that injury. He's going to miss several months in the season, so maybe he'll be healthy for the playoffs, maybe not. But let's look at the rest of their roster, though. I've got another concern. It does look like their roster is pretty much done as of today. There's a report that it's thought that no one will match the qualifying offer on Pat McCaw. So he will be back with the Warriors, and I believe he's their 15th player. I guess they could cut some of their two-way players at any rate. But the point is, if you look at this roster, it is pretty thin on big men, and they'll be fine with what they have now.
Well, maybe to what I was saying, like we would love this if they did Curry, Clay, if they did something like Curry, Clay, Looney or Bell, and then played either Durant or Draymond. Basically the combo of Looney, Bell, Draymond, or Looney, Bell, Durant. Between those four, they've got a great thing. It's just we'll have to see what they do with Looney and Bell. And if they don't give those two major minutes, then you're right. Because, I think Omri Caspi, David, how am I dropping his last name? David West, obviously JaVale McGee. They lost
McGee's a big loss, and Pachulia might be too.
Is Pachulia gone as well? So, yeah, basically they lost all of their veteran bigs. So the question is, who is going to get those minutes?
Yeah, and Looney and Bell, I think, are the key guys here. So they've looked great, but they are very young. And they're also guys that have had a lot of injuries. And on top of that, they are not 7-footers like Pachulia and McGee were. They're more like 6'8", 6'9". So they're good players, they're good forwards and decent big men, but they're not, really big bodies. They have Damian Jones still. He's a rookie rookie contract player who's going to be in his third year. Hasn't really played at all yet. Wasn't very good in college. They just declined his the next year team option, so that could say something about their faith in him. Although they did that for Looney last year and brought him back. So it may not be anything. The aforementioned Jerebko, he's in his 30s. He's not going to play heavy minutes. So my point is, if Looney or Bell goes down to an injury and then Cousins doesn't come back healthy, they're not going to have a lot of big men. They're going to have to sign someone or make a trade. Who knows? So that it's, we're quibbling here. They still may be one of the best teams of all time, but they're not invincible by any means. And I'm not even sure that they should be favored over Toronto or Houston next year.
Yeah, I mean, that is really all we are. And the funny thing about favored over Toronto is, I think to get to the NBA Finals, whoever wins the East is going to have one hard matchup. So I think out East you have Toronto, Philadelphia, Boston. I think those three teams kind of and Boston, by the way, is another, we haven't talked that much, but Kyrie and Gordon Hayward, how much those two players come back healthy matters a great deal to how good that team is. Well, those three teams have a very good shot of looking good. And I think Boston, if we're talking the Golden State of the East, I think Boston, with Al Horford's age, Gordon Hayward, and Kyrie's injuries, is the one I think people are higher on than they should be. But whatever team wins the East, I think has one hard match, because I think there are three really good teams. But I think the rest of the East isn't that great. I think Washington got a little better, but I just don't. I think the West is pretty strong. So I think it's possible, and this was an advantage to LeBron James back in the day. It's possible that whatever team comes out of the East has a less bumpy ride than whoever comes out of the West. And that, again, that's what we're saying, is these little things kind of just accumulate on themselves in terms of making your odds of winning a title. It's slightly longer playoff series, a few more losses in the regular season so you have a worse seed, getting your players dinged up. All these kind of things can just add up and crumble a good team. And we're just saying there are enough cracks in the wall of Golden State that I think if there's enough pressure applied in the right places, this team could massively underwhelm. And I think people just are not taking that outcome seriously enough.
Yeah, and just to hammer this point home, it's not that they're not the favorites. They probably will be. It's just how much of favorites are they? We think maybe not very much. So to expand on this, let's say one or two of their big men get hurt scenario heading into the playoffs. Well, it's not just Houston in the West and Toronto or whoever else comes out of the East. Two of the teams we've been mentioning, Utah and Oklahoma City, those are probably going to be top 5 defensive teams next year. Just huge, massive lineups. Oklahoma City's probably going to be Adams, Noel, George, Robertson, Westbrook. That is going to be ridiculous. Probably the best rebounding team in the league.
Such an easy bet to put them to win the title. They are my So the few bets I have, right, is I think Oklahoma City, take the over, right? Whatever you can get on the over, it's probably too low. I think they underrate players. OKC over, huge. Valanciunas as your most improved player. I think those are great bets next season.
Yeah, so all I'm trying to say is that the Warriors are dinged up on the front line in the playoffs, and they face, a Gobert Favors or Noel Adams front line. That's going to be a lot of offensive rebounds they give up. And, they'll still probably win, but those are series that they won't be as favored in, I think, as people realize.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got 2 more things to end up on. I'm going to call one the subtweet of the week, although, Brian, I did good. This isn't a real subtweet because I actually did it. I did say it to him on Twitter. So Sheridan Hoops, who is a very common Golden State blogger, rekindled one of the weirdest arguments I have ever seen in your stupid history, Brian, of the Warriors franchise, which is, would they have been better off keeping Harrison Barnes than Kevin Durant? No. And that argument is coming up again, which is weird because Kevin Durant has won back-to-back Finals MVPs for that squad and has kept the team in contention when Curry has gone down. Obviously, Kevin Durant for Harrison Barnes was the right move. I'm amazed. When this was happening, this was the funny part, because when Durant to Golden State was a rumor, which means that they were on the radar and he was getting courted heavily, but they just couldn't announce it because they didn't want to get fined like Magic Johnson.
Which was way in advance, right? Maybe a year before it happened.
Yes. When that was out there were Golden State Warriors talking heads basically talking about team chemistry, team cohesion. Would it be smarter to keep Harrison Barnes than Durant for lineup chemistry? And we were like, no, it's stupid. And then after the trade went, and for what it's worth, it looks like Harrison Barnes got injured. I do want to give Harrison Barnes some credit because he looked good young. He got injured somewhere, I think, in that 4th year. And he was out injured. And he just has not come back. So that makes the answer even easier. But if you look at Kevin Durant's production for the last 2 seasons and the fact that he took home rightfully the Finals MVPs 2 seasons in a row, clearly this was the right move. And if you look at the contract that Harrison Barnes ended up signing, it's so close to Durant's. It's like, this is not a debate. This is not a question. So I called it my subtweet of the week because I was going to bash him on the show, but then I actually did tell him on Twitter right before. I was like, what are you talking about? So there is that. And then I'm just going to give my shout out, Brian, which is to the WNBA. They had their All-Star game and had a great turnout. And I just going to keep hammering home a point we make that sports in the United States are intrinsically socialist. And by that, what I mean is so many predominantly male sports in the United States get huge amounts of government money. 80% of stadiums are, have assistance and funding from government. They get a lot of free just coverage from major outlets. That is a huge part of sports, and that we believe that women's sports could be vastly more popular if they started getting more benefits like that. And there is already a very obvious demand for women's sports without that help. And we would love, if we are going to keep up the model of public financing helps pay for sports, or mainstream media attention gives a lot of attention to sports, we would love to see more attention showered on women's sports. And again, the WNBA just had a fantastic All-Star game. I think attendance is over 15,000. It's one of these where, just like we're talking like an economics perspective and arbitrage, it's such a funny one where you go, a slight increase in how much attention and money you are giving this, like the WNBA in particular, could lead to massive returns. Yet we see, for instance, the fact that the NFL is still going to be getting lots of money and attention. And our belief might be that in 10, 20 years, the NFL might be a fraction of what it is now, thanks to all of its issues.
Yeah, and, I'm disappointed. I have to give some shade to the RNBA subreddit, which we usually love on this show. I don't know if it was Professor Barry's article or one of the players or someone else got this topic up to the top of that subreddit. And of course, every single person said something like, well, the NBA is pumping money into the WNBA, so who cares what the revenue number is? The players don't deserve to make any money. But like you said, the attendance is way ahead of where the NBA was when it was this far along. So, yeah, sucks for you. Bad times.
That exact point. Then if you're going to use that argument, then you have to take away the stuff for NBA teams.
Exactly.
Every NBA team has like a major stadium, a lot of them in big cities. It's like BS that you just get to take that as a given. It's the classic, we are a very left-leaning show, Brian, but the classic born on third, think he had a triple. The number of people that I earned this, it's like, well, you were given a huge advantage ahead of time, and thanks to that advantage, you were able to make a lot of money, which congratulations, but don't act like people that don't get that advantage are somehow beneath you. And even to the NBA is pumping money in. I know David Stern was a big fan of the WNBA, but we can ask questions like that where you look at the fact that for instance, the what is the New York? Is it the New York Liberty?
Believe so. That sounds right.
New York Liberty don't play in Madison Square Gardens. I believe the Washington Wizards, they wanted to put the is it the Mystic, right? They wanted to put them in a training facility. It's like you have these big stadiums and people are like, well, that's where they play. It's like, no, that's not. And it's like, you don't put the same amount of money. You don't put the same attention. We complain constantly about NBA League Pass for the NBA. The amount of attention and coverage the NBA gives WNBA games is also criminal. The ease of accessing advanced stats and stuff is criminal as well in comparison. So it's like, yeah, this belief that like, well, they give them a little, so why are you complaining? It's the complaint where like, given how much attention they are gathering with that little, why don't you try giving them a little more? That's all we're saying. And get the fuck out of here. I'm going to get the FOH on the show, Brian, with this argument that any male sport in the United States doesn't benefit greatly from public subsidies. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, and I did want to ask you a little bit about those Chris Sheridan comments, though, because I didn't see that at all, and that was baffling to me. Can you tell me, I want to have an open mind, though. Can you give me any of his reasoning or why? Because I can't think of any reason why you'd want Harrison Barnes over Durant.
I do love you for this show, Brian, because basically, as you noted very sadly, you should pay women's sports more, particularly the WNBA, give them more attention. That gets you in an argument on, like, as you were saying, NBA subreddit. Whereas, like I said to you, you're like, yes, that's very obvious. That's very clear. Who the hell thinks Barnes over Durant? So
exactly.
I'll try. I mean, you can go to his tweets and reply, but he just said, He goes, I don't know. Da, 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 da. The whole KD is better than Harrison Barnstock. But did he really come through when they felt like it was time for that insurance policy kick in versus Houston? That's a hell no. Plus, no KD equals more Curry. That's a better team. So that's his. To me, that doesn't mean much because they go 2 for 2 if they kept. So he's basically saying, had they kept Harrison Barnes, they would have won both titles, and Kevin Durant minimized Steph Curry. Whereas I'll go the other way and say Steph Curry's been dinged up, and Patrick's point makes much more sense, which is if you have a star player and you lose that star player, that can set you back on the rungs of success. The fact that the Warriors lost their star player for 30 games and turned into a 58-win squad instead of a 48-win squad, like, for instance, the Utah Jazz, is a huge reason they were competitive this year.
Yeah, those arguments don't make any sense. Sorry, Chris Sheridan. I don't agree with you.
All right. Well, I got my subtweet. I got my shout out. If you've got a shout out, Brian, I'll let you do that. And if that'll be our show.
Yeah. I have 2 quick shout outs. Speaking of Kevin Durant, JJ Redick, I did not hear it, but people wrote about this. He said on his podcast that he supported Durant 100% his move to Golden State, and that people who do not support him are racist because white owners and GMs can do whatever they want and not get called out for it. JJ Redick is correct about that. Good job saying that. One more, I have a political shout out to Ron Dellums, who passed away today. Longtime Oakland politician. He was mayor. He was in Congress. He was involved in civil rights back in the day. 82 years old. Really long, great career for Ron Dellums. Rip in peace.
And by the way, I got to throw one more on, Brian. I would have been remiss if we didn't include this. We probably missed several good shout outs this week. LeBron James opened a public school with his money for in Akron. And again, this is not a charter school, it's a public school. It's, I just love seeing LeBron do this. It's one of those funny things that he's ever been a villain. When he made the decision, he took the money, the advertising money for that, and gave it to I believe to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. He's doing this it's really weird, on the spectrum of NBA players and what they've done with their money and done with their political influence. It's funny to ever see LeBron James as a villain. So good on you, LeBron James, for that. All right. That has been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week. We've got a streak of one going, Brian, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays at twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You can catch the live show recaps, as funny as that sounds, channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as the Box Score Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, it helps us out. I've been your host, Trey Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Box Score Brian. With us in spirit, Patrick Mint. You can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show, and we'll see you next week.